Back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. You see on the screen there, we're talking teens, suicide, and depression. With us is Dr. Greg Plemons and also Dr. Heather Kreth, both from over at Vanderbilt. And they deal with these issues with teens and some of the things that go along with depression and suicide that can come up. And we're going to get more into those details. But we had Ann that waited through the break, guys, so let's take a call from her. Hi. Ann, good morning. Hi, Ann.
Good morning. First, let me commend Vanderbilt. Through my years with Metro Schools, I accompanied many, specifically teenager, to Vanderbilt, and commend you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Parents assume that the traditional role of a guidance counselor is the same as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And it is not anymore.
Yeah.
Boy.
And depression and symptoms are not picked up on as early in the elementary years as they used to be because of that. And now we're not picking up on it until the teen years. Am I assuming and making assumptions in that, or I'd like your opinion on that, because I saw that in my experience in working with these children, and especially when it came to cutting with girls and with pills and overdoses in females, especially between the ages of 14 and 17. Guidance counselors don't do screening. They do paper pushing and college assessments, and that is the priority that the district puts on them now, not assessing children for depression and suicide, and that is where their focus needs to be.
You guys are nodding along.
Yeah.
Well, teachers have so much on their plate as it is now. My goodness.
Definitely.
But she makes a good point.
Absolutely. I think she's highlighting really the issues around kind of changing funding for things and access to services, and I absolutely agree that I think the role of guidance counselors and school supports has changed, and I think it again highlights to what we mentioned before, that screening is really important, and asking kids how they're doing and how their mood is really important, and you can pick up on things earlier and reduce risk for more serious problems the more that you're asking about it. Obviously, I think that becomes a question of kind of where resources get put and how, what you fund as far as what kinds of assessment and screening you're going to do. I think it brings up kind of thinking about general pediatric appointment screening, and I don't know if you want to talk to about that.
I mean, the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is the largest group of pediatricians in the country, a couple of years ago rolled out a screening model for depression. And so traditionally, screening for depression was just kind of done hit or miss, and now they're recommended starting at age 13 at any well-child visit. When you come in for your shot, we ask some questions about depression. The problem with teenagers is they don't like to go to the doctor. I mean, the only way you can get teenagers into the doctor sometimes is they need a sports physical.
Yeah, right.
Or, they really have a bad sore throat or something. So I think part of that is trying to capture that population, and a lot of programs are looking at school-based screening.
Right.
That happens at the school. That's where they are, and
That's
but you have to back that up with training and support and all the things that go along with that. We can implement a great screening program, but you've got to have resources to bolster that.
Right.
Now, how do you know if a teen, if you're a parent or a friend or someone observing them, is a teen that is at risk, the type that you deal with, and are they suffering? Are some of these teens, do they have perhaps a mental illness? They're dealing with bipolarism, things that are treated, that we see in adults as well. Or, you can also have some teens that are at risk that maybe, mentally don't have those issues, but maybe they're being constantly bullied, or they're feeling pressures that become overwhelming to them. Is there a difference there? I assume the worst would be if you have a teen, your situation, that's bipolar and is also, for whatever reason, ostracized or bullied by others, and you combine those together, and they're really in trouble. But how do you know the difference? And I guess the root of this is, how do you know too when teens these days are complaining about stress and such, and look, we all deal with it. How do you know when that's just, okay, that's normal stress, you're stressed out about finals. Don't freak, that's normal. Or you say, okay, he's so stressed out about finals, I'm worried about him. How do you know where that line is?
I think parents know their kids best. So there is certainly normal levels of teen anxiety and stress about finals, or my boyfriend just dumped me,
Right.
or that kind of thing. I think, certainly if someone has a diagnosed mental illness, there are several mental illnesses that are linked to higher risk of suicidality, like depression, for example, or if you're talking about bipolar disorder. But in general, if parents are sort of concerned, what are the warning signs? So if you're noticing a change in your child's mood, so you're noticing, gosh, they used to be so bright and happy, and they just don't seem that way anymore. If you're noticing sort of extreme levels of irritability, so not just general teenage moodiness, but really extreme levels of irritability, it's very normal for teenagers to start to want to kind of spend more time alone and not with their parents. But if you're noticing that your child really never wants to be around the family, never wants to leave their bedroom, is isolating themselves a lot, there's obviously the more traditional symptoms like lots of crying, expressing pretty significant feelings about guilt about things that they really shouldn't be feeling guilty about, but they're kind of feeling shame or guilt about things. If you're noticing more kind of sudden changes in behavior with high-risk behaviors, so a kiddo that was not traditionally engaging in some high-risk behaviors is now suddenly, coming home drunk or sneaking out of the home, or there's changes in those kinds of things. Those are all, red flags and risks. And then obviously, if your child is kind of telling you, feeling you out in some ways and saying, hey, I've kind of been thinking about what would it be like if I wasn't here, or if I wasn't around, or I've just sort of thought about it. Try as much as you can to not panic, to not get angry at your child or say, what are you talking about? You have a great life. Things are good. You should be happy. You really want to try to not sort of invalidate that for a child. But you want to really make yourself sort of, okay, I'm here. I'm listening. And we'll figure this out together. And then seek out the supports from a professional who can help you sort of navigate what the risk actually is.
So there's different triggers then, too, right, doctor? I mean, like I said, my friend, his daughter was high achieving and everything, and it seemed like when she turned 15 or got into adolescence, a switch. I mean, there was nothing else that changed in her life, but it had to be hormonal or something, adolescence, a switch, and everything changed.
Well, you bring up a good point. So if you look at the model of depression, puberty is a risk factor. The risk of depression in kids goes up as kids enter puberty for reasons that we don't know.
Your body's changing.
Your body is changing. And about half of the people that are adults diagnosed with depression, most of those kids are emerging somewhere in the teenage years. So between 15 to 19, if you were going to be an adult with depression, about half of those people that were adults, you start to see those signs early, kind of in the 15 to 19 year age group. So, but definitely asking about family history of mental illness is important.
Is that important, family history? If you have a mother that was manic depressive, then you might want to look, well, heck, my mom, manic depressive, bipolar. My dad, straight as can be. But they kept a close eye on me and my brother through just what you said, to see whether or not we would. I can be manic sometimes, but I'm nothing like my mom. And so, but they monitored us. My parents are very intelligent, and then you listen. Our kids could end up having your problem, the depression and those issues. Let's watch it. And neither of us, knock on wood, ended up with that, but we watched for that. So family history can be one indicator.
Yep, absolutely. Other risks for things like for suicide are a sudden loss. So if there's been a death or a sudden loss in the family, that can be a risk. You want to, if somebody is really feeling isolated, ostracized, they're kind of losing supports and things like that, that is also the strongest kind of predictor for suicide risk is prior suicide attempts. So someone who has had a suicide attempt in the past, there is a strong association with another attempt.
Well, okay. And the other thing I wonder about some of the teens, you hear about some of these schools where they have like a suicide one kid does it.
Yeah.
And then others follow suit. And then you hear about the shows. I remember there was all this. I don't know. Is this even still on? 13 Reasons Why.
I think the third season is.
Okay, I was going to bring it up. Now, my son, I think, had watched it at one point, and I remember even addressing it with him, asking him, "Does this make you think? Deal more with suicide?" And he goes, "No, Dad, the show's pretty good, and it doesn't get me that way." But he thought, I can see how some other kids might view it differently.
Yeah. I think by and large, at least my colleagues and peers were not thrilled with that show.
Okay.
And just how I think there were concerns about it glorifying suicide in some way, so kind of increasing risk of copycat.
So that can happen, right?
Absolutely. That's been shown. It's called the contagion effect.
Yeah,
some
that's what the
some people call it the
was.
Werther effect, because people were doing this 200 years ago when Goethe published a novel about a young man that killed himself, and literally there were copycat suicides after that event. So I mean, this is nothing new. It's just I think with social media, it sort of amplifies, and we certainly see that with self-injurious behavior with cutting. There are Instagram accounts where kids can follow, and
so they see it there, and that's what the other part of it I was going to see too. Social media has brought so many wonderful things to us, but also just some real headaches as well. Yeah. If you go on people's Facebook page, I think we all know they post on there, and we all like attention, or whatever, and they make their lives look great.
Right.
And so, and that's not true all the time. but the point is, you can go on social media and see what your friends are doing in high school and think somehow like, I'm not doing any of this fun stuff. And most of what they're posting is a bunch of crap. But still, you see that and you believe it, and you think, well, they're going and doing all this fun. I'm not. Does that feed into the depression? Because that didn't exist when we were in high school. I mean, and I can see it. It just seems like social media is that a factor now with kids, and maybe as we see, I don't know if there is a spike in teen suicide.
Definitely, there is a spike in teen suicide that we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years.
I'm sorry. Social media. I have to believe there's no question in my mind. Kids seeing what other kids are doing, whether it's copycat or because they feel they're not having fun or they're being left out or they're being attacked on, plays a role. There's just no question.
Well, it's FOMO, fear of missing out, is the term that gets thrown around. But I think part of the problem is it really is kind of chicken or egg. We know that if you are depressed, that you tend to isolate more, and so you may be spending more time on social media. So it may feed on itself, but I think it's not 100% clear. That we can't blame all of this on the smartphone, or Facebook. There are other factors into play, and some people even talk about the recession. That there's a downstream effect from 2009 that's been studied in the adult population, and so poverty and
what
stressors.
They went through, and then they haven't been able to bounce back from it, like a lot have.
Right.
Oh, economic factors.
Economic factors, inability to access resources because of those economic factors. I'll make sure I get the number right here. Tennessee ranks 42nd in the nation out of our 50 states on access to care ranking for mental health. So that means that we have, and obviously 50 is not good. So we're on the kind of poor access end of the spectrum. So it means that we have a higher proportion of people with a diagnosable mental illness, and we have less access to care. So, that definitely plays into it too. And then when you add economic factors, and there definitely is theories about kind of downstream effect from the recession and things like that, people are not able to access the care that's needed to start to address this earlier.
Or the resilience that made us more resilient 10 years ago isn't there, right?
Yep.
Communities are struggling with opioid epidemics and loss of jobs and those kinds of things, and social bonds and all those things that were more present 20 years ago are gone. So.
All right, let's take a break on that. I mean, that's wow. When we come back too, we can take more calls, and we'll get into more. Just I know there's not enough treatment beds, but what the type of treatment is, and there's everything from the counseling to, I'm sure in some cases there's medicines that can help and all of that. So we'll take a break. The bottom line is there's hope in all this. We paint a dark picture because it's a sad topic, but there's a good side to it too in terms of that there's help out there. We'll take a break and be back with more right after this.